Hello, this is McD the Beast, and this is McD Sports 4 coming to you today with my college football top 25 for Week 8 of the 2022 college football season. Before I continue, don't forget to hit the thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel. Greatly appreciate if you do that. Let me just say this about this past week in college football. What a lot of games down to the wire. Very exciting games all around. I mean, you got your money's worth if you sat home this past Saturday and watched college football all day like I did. You got your money's worth. From the 12 o'clock games, I know one of the games at 12 o'clock wasn't really a big game, wasn't really a close game in the second half, but you had several close games there. 3 o'clock, probably game of the year at 3 o'clock happened. Even the 7 to 8 o'clock games, you had a huge game that turned out to be a thriller. So you got your money's worth. This upcoming week in college football, unfortunately, isn't as many top 25 matchups, but you still have some. You have, I think, a big game this week as well. But let's get into it. College football top 25 for week 8, and we'll kick off with number 25, Mississippi State. Yeah, I know they lost to Kentucky. I still think they're a top 25 team. I have them at number 25. Um, Mississippi State, if you look at their resume, they're 5-2. Their two losses is to number 24 LSU, and they lost to Kentucky this past weekend, which I think is a top 30 team. Um, I mean, I do think Mississippi State also has two similar wins against Arkansas, and who else did they beat? They beat someone else. Oh yeah, Texas A&M. They have two similar wins there as well, where they were blowout wins. So I think they get Alabama this week. I think they get Alabama at a horrible time, just like last year. So but number 25 Mississippi State, I still think they're a top 25 team. Number 24 LSU. We're on the road into the swamp and beat Florida. Pretty impressive win. 45-35 was the final in that one. You look at LSU's resume, the Florida State loss. I still think Florida State at worst is a top 35 team. And then you look at the other loss to Tennessee on the road. They weren't really in that game. Actually, that game was in Baton Rouge. So that was in Death Valley. But they weren't really in that game. But Tennessee is, I think, going to be in everybody's top four this in this week's poll. So LSU, we'll see what happens. But number 24 LSU, I do think they are a top 25 team. I think Brian Kelly overall is doing a good job. They still have Bama. They still have Arkansas, A&M. They still have some big games, but number 24 LSU. Number 23 Oregon State. Let's show the Beef some love. If you look at Oregon State's resume, the two losses are to two teams that are going to be ahead of them in this poll in Utah and USC. You still get Oregon on the schedule. I believe I don't know. I forget if you guys played Washington or not yet, but Oregon State, they're getting the job done. I mean, I said they'll beat Wazoo. I felt confident in that, and they did convincingly. So let's show some love to Oregon State. Number 23, Oregon State. Jonathan Smith is doing a very good job with that program. Number 22, Kansas State. I know you guys didn't play. You had bye this week. I moved you guys up 2 spots. The Big 12 is pretty good. Kansas State only has one loss to number 21 on my poll. So Kansas State's undefeated in the Big 12. You guys, I believe, still get Texas. You still get uh, Oklahoma State. You still get some of these programs that are having pretty good seasons. So number 22 Kansas State, I like what I'm seeing a lot at Kansas State. Number 21 Tulane, I do think Tulane is the best Group of 5 team right now. I'm pretty confident in saying that. And I'm going to talk more about the Group of 5 and the teams that I dropped and the teams that I just missed. But and I'll talk more about them. But I do think Tulane is the top Group of 5 team right now. Right now, I said Willie Fritz. They went 2-10 last year. Tulane. I said they can't go any worse. I said Willie Fritz. I believe is a good coach. I think he'll at least get this program back to bowling. I didn't expect this good though. We'll see what Tulane does down the stretch. They're in the American Conference. I still think is a that in my opinion. I think they'll is a little bit top heavy this year. But there are still some good teams there in the American. So number 21 Tulane. Number 20 North Carolina. They have one loss against a bad Notre Dame team, and let me tell you something. Notre Dame lost to Stanford. that's a bad loss for Notre Dame. But North Carolina, um, yeah, they only have one loss. They beat everybody else on their schedule. Keep an eye on them. I'm still not sold on the defense, but keep an eye on them. One loss, you gotta respect it. You gotta put them in the top 25. Number 20, North Carolina. Number 19, NC State. I know Devin Leary's out for the year. They went on the road and lost to Syracuse. I still think this is a top 25-ish school. Um, you look at NC State. They lost to Clemson. They lost to Syracuse. They're going to get North Carolina down the stretch. They're also going to go ahead and get Wake Forest as well. So we'll see what happens with NC State. It's going to be interesting to see how they play with backup quarterback. I think overall the roster is still a top 25-ish roster. I wasn't going to penalize them for going into that game with a backup quarterback. They kept it competitive for the most part. I know Syracuse kind of ran away with it late, but number 19, NC State. I moved you guys down 8 spots. Number 18, Penn State. I only moved Penn State down 2 spots. You might be like, why did I only move them down 2 spots? They lost 41-17 to Michigan on the road. And let me just say this. I told you about Penn State. This is a big I told you so. I said I wasn't really buying into Penn State. And the reason why I wasn't buying into Penn State was I honestly think the 2023 Penn State Nittany Lions is going to be a top 10 team. I think that's going to be the team James Franklin is going to – I think that's going to be the team. I said Penn State was a year out coming into the season. I said that basically they're probably going to go 8-4 this year. And to their credit, they are exceeding my expectations. And if you look at Penn State, they get Ohio State in 2 weeks. If that's the only other loss to attend to, this is a very successful season for Penn State in my eyes. But that second half, I think, just proved my point. I mean, Jim Harbaugh said in the locker room after the game, guys, that was a butt kicking. Yeah, that second half, Penn State got outscored 25-3. That was a butt kicking. But at the end of the day, it's their first loss of the season. I'm not gonna penalize a team that only has one loss in the Big Ten, that much. So I moved Penn State down 2 spots to number 18. Number 17, Illinois. Illinois looks like the best team in the Big Ten West. Big game against Purdue on November 12th. We're still a few weeks out from that. Illinois might have another loss on their schedule, but they beat Minnesota. They beat Wisconsin. They beat Iowa. They still have to go up. They still have to go up against a Nebraska team that I still think is going to be at least competitive down the stretch here. But Illinois, what Brett Bielema was doing there, he, in my opinion, I know people are saying, "Oh, give the Kansas coach, his name always Lance Leipold, give him the coach of the year." No, you gotta give Brett Bielema the coach of the year. What he's doing there at Illinois is unbelievable. I moved them up 8 spots from number 25 to number 17. They only have one loss, and their loss is kind of a bad loss against Indiana. And Indiana, they're not a bad team per se, but they're going to be one in the bottom half of the Big Ten when the season's over. But you look at Illinois, I think you gotta give Brett Bielema the coach of the year, at least the Big Ten coach of the year, so far this year. So number 17, Illinois. Number 16, Texas. Ugly win against Iowa State. I did move you up 1 spot. Maybe a bit of a hangover after blowing out your arch rival in the Red River Shootout, but I still think they're in a deep conference. I still think they're probably going to lose a game somewhere, in my opinion, Texas. But I moved you guys up 1 spot. You beat an Iowa State team that's at least going to be competitive down the stretch. It is a decent win at the end of the day. So go ahead, give me Texas at number 16. Number 15, now the top 15, Wake Forest. Had a bye week. I didn't move you guys any. We'll see how you guys play down the stretch. Still have NC State. Still have Syracuse. You still have I forget who else you guys have, but you still have at least those 2 teams you gotta go up against. So we'll see how it is down the stretch. But Wake Forest, the only loss is to Clemson in overtime. So number 15, Wake Forest. Number 14, Utah. Move Utah up 4 spots. And you're going to be like, oh, Utah should be ahead of USC. And I'll get into USC here in a second. But I disagree with that motion. First of all, USC only has 1 loss. Utah has 2 losses. Utah's 2 losses is against UCLA. I do think UCLA is better than Utah. And I wish Utah was a bit more competitive in that game, but you did lose to them. And then a horrible loss to Florida. I'm just going to be honest with saying this. I think that loss to Florida is a bad loss for Utah. I really do. So I am and LSU beating Florida does not help Utah at all. So Utah, in my opinion, I do think they are the best 2-loss team in the country, but a bit of a bonehead loss to Florida. UCLA, I'm not going to really penalize you too much for that, but um, it's a big win at home against a USC team that I had in my top 10. So good win for Utah at home. They're still very well in the Pac-12 race with only 1 loss in the Pac-12, so keep that in mind as well. But number 14, Utah moved you guys up 4 spots. Uh, Number 13, Syracuse. What can I say about Daniel Babers? He was on the hot seat. He was basically told, bowl game or you're gone. That's basically what the athletic director came out and said for Syracuse. Well, I got some news for you. Daniel Babers will not be fired because he made a bowl game. Syracuse is 6-0. Big win at home against NC State. I know you guys are going up against the backup quarterback. I don't care. That's a big time win. You guys do go on the road against Clemson next week. I'm just going to come out and say right now I'm picking Clemson to win that game because they're just going to out-talent Syracuse, in my opinion. But Syracuse could very well win 10 games this year, in my opinion. Very well. They're undefeated. I moved you guys up 7 spots. I think you guys deserve to be in the top 15. So number 13, Syracuse. Number 12, USC. I moved USC down 4 spots. Yeah, they went on the road and lost to Utah by 1 point in a wild, crazy game. Um, I said that USC is going to struggle against teams that could play well in the line of scrimmage. I think you did see that a little bit. I know the first half was pretty good for USC, but once the game continued into the second half, it kind of started draining on USC a little bit, getting outscored 22-14 there in the second half. I still think you guys still get UCLA on the schedule. That's probably going to be the make or break game for USC there at the end of the year. But overall, I only moved USC down 4 spots. They did kind of impress me in that game, only because I did thought that game would be a bit more convincing for Utah. Utah kind of had played down from behind for most of that game. So give USC credit for going on the road in a hostile environment and doing that. But that's just a more victory. I still think they're a top 15 team, Southern Cal. So number 12, USC. Number 11, Oklahoma State. I moved Oklahoma State down 5 spots. This defense for Oklahoma State does concern me a little bit. And I know they did probably, but they didn't get rid of him. He left for Ohio State. I do know that Jim Knowles was probably the best defensive coordinator Oklahoma State is probably ever going to have. They do have Derek Mason, who I think is a very good defensive coordinator, but you can tell his defense has taken a step back. They did blow a 30-16 lead against TCU. I guess the good news for Oklahoma State is that you're very well still alive, I think, to be in the college football playoff race. I think you guys are still very well alive to be in the Big 12 championship race. But I moved Oklahoma State down 5 spots. And in my opinion, I thought Oklahoma State was clearly the better team going into this game, and it did look like that for 3 quarters. They blew a 30-16 lead, Oklahoma State. It is a disappointing loss in my opinion for them, but I still think they're at worst a top 15 team. As a matter of fact, I honestly think they're a top 10 team. But I moved you guys down 5 spots. It's just how the week played out, the games played out. I had moved you outside the top 10, but I can see them very well back into the top 10, Oklahoma State. So Oklahoma State moved you down 5 spots to number 11. Now the top 10. Number 10, Oregon. Big game against UCLA this week. UCLA is number 9. College game day will be in Eugene for this one. To me, this is your game of the week here on number 9 UCLA going on the road against number 10 Oregon. We'll see what Oregon does at home against from that good home field advantage crowd there in Eugene. But you guys didn't play a game this week, so I kept you guys at number 10. Number 9 UCLA. I think they are the best team in the Pac-12. They're undefeated. As I said, they do go on the road and beat Oregon. I mean, and not beat Oregon, play Oregon. I haven't made up my mind who I'm going to pick for this game. If UCLA goes on the road and beats Oregon, though, um, I think you seriously gotta consider them for the college football playoff contender. Right now it's just Pac-12 contenders, and the Pac-12 in my opinion more than anything. But you seriously got to consider UCLA if they go on the road and beat Oregon to be a college football playoff contender. But I moved UCLA up 5 spots. I know they did not play, but they are undefeated, and they are the only undefeated team in the Pac-12. So number 9, UCLA. Number 8, Ole Miss. Um, I wouldn't call it a convincing win against Auburn. I do. I'll say this about Auburn. I think Brian Harsin is going to get fired today. I thought he would get fired last week. Ed came on and said that. Um, I think he will get fired either today or tomorrow. We'll see what happens. But I will say this about Auburn. I did think they did put together their best effort they could in this one. It's just that the whole situation at Auburn is a mess in my opinion. And to be honest, not I'll only say maybe only like 10 or 15% of it's Brian Harsin's fault. But I do think it's probably best for him more than anything for him just to get fired there. So we'll see what happens. But Ole Miss, not I won't call it a convincing win, but they did win by 2 touchdowns, 48-34 against Auburn at home. I moved you guys up 1 spot. Um, they get LSU next week, top 25 matchup. We'll see what happens there. I believe that is in Death Valley, so we'll see what happens there. But Ole Miss number 8, number 7 TCU. Guys, you gotta take TCU seriously. Now, personally, me, I still think they're gonna lose a game or two. I still do. I thought one of the games they would lose was to Oklahoma State. They still get Texas. They still get Oklahoma. And you might sit there and be like, "Why don't keep on mentioning Oklahoma?" I'll get into that when I talk about the teams that dropped out. Um, they still get they still get Kansas State. They still get uh Baylor, Iowa State. So TCU. Still a lot of football play. We'll see what happens, but they're undefeated. You got to put them in your top 10, in my opinion. Even if you're not pretty sold on it like me, you got to put them in your top 10. Number 7, TCU. Moved you up 6 spots. Number 6, Alabama. Alabama's kind of at number 6 by default. Looking at the teams that I had in the top 6 going into this week, they were the only one that lost in the top 6 this week. I mean, first of all, what a hell of a game against Tennessee. That's going to be a game that you're going to be watching 20 years from now. That's an instant classic right there. I said I was not sold on Alabama secondary. I was correct on that. Offensively, I'm sold on Alabama. I do think that they're still very well in the SEC West picture. They're still very well in the college football playoff picture. But I had dropped them down 4 spots. I mean, when you lose, I gotta drop you. So I know there's some teams that lost this year that I actually moved up, but that's early on in the season. We're in mid October now. If you lose, I gotta drop you to some fault. So I still think Bama at worst is a top 6 team, but I mean you look at that game. It's probably it was a coin flip game in my opinion. I picked Tennessee to win the game outright in the upset. I was correct on that. Um, I'll just say this though. I expect Alabama next week against Mississippi State to absolutely win that game. So number 6, Alabama. Number 5, Clemson. I'm not sold on Clemson. I'm just not. They let Florida State come back into that game a little bit. Um, they still beat Florida State, and I still think Florida State at worst is a top 40 program. They do have a win against a top 25 team in this poll, but you look at Clemson, I'm just not sold on them. There's just something. I mean, they're going to beat Syracuse this week because they're just more talented than them. They could very well run the table, go 13-0 with the ACC championship win. I just think they're going to get ran out the building in the semi finals games in the playoffs if they end up there. I just do. The number 5, in my opinion, Clemson. I did not move them. I'm just not sold on them. That's very where it comes down to with me. I know a lot of people had Clemson up. Some people had Clemson at number 4 coming into their pool, coming into the season in their pool, the AP pool specifically. I had Clemson, I think, at number 9 or number 10 coming into the season. I mean, they are undefeated. I'll give them that. They do have some top 25 wins against NC State, Wake Forest. I think they'll get another one against Syracuse this upcoming week. But um, I just something. I'm just not sold on them. That's what it comes down to. I don't think they're a national championship contender. I think they're a playoff contender, but that's it. So number 5, Clemson. Number 4, Tennessee. They finally got that monkey off their back, didn't they? You gotta take Tennessee seriously. If you can hang 52 on Nick Saban in Alabama, you can hang 52 on anybody. They still have Georgia down the stretch, and whoops, I had Georgia at 3. I had Georgia at 2. They still have Georgia down the stretch. Um, but I mean, if you don't have Tennessee in your top 4 going into this week in college in your top 25 pool, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Tennessee number 4, they still got they still got Georgia. We'll see what happens down the stretch. I know some people are gonna sit there and be like, they still have Kentucky, guys. They're gonna boat race Kentucky. I'm just gonna come out and say it. They're gonna boat race Kentucky, in my opinion. Uh, so number 4, Tennessee. I moved you guys up 3 spots. Michigan number 3. Kind of gave a little bit of a preview there, but Michigan number 3. I moved Michigan up 1 spot. Very impressive second half against Penn State. I kind of alluded to this earlier. Um, Michigan's probably going to be 11-0 going into Columbus. I know people are going to sit there and be like, you might look at the schedule, you'd be like, where's the game? Where's the game that they could trip up at? They already played the 2 games that I thought they could have tripped up at against Iowa and Penn State, and and to be honest with Michigan, if it wasn't for a fluke pick six and and one play by Penn State where Penn State just fooled Michigan's defense, this game could have been really ugly and be 41-3. So that's how bad Michigan just absolutely beat down Penn State. I moved Michigan up 1 spot. Georgia number 2. Um, I kept Georgia number 2. In my opinion, I still look at that Oregon win, and I'm still just wowed by it. That's really where it comes down to. I mean, Michigan, they have impressive wins against um, Penn State. They have the win against Iowa, even though Iowa's kind of fallen off a cliff a little bit. I do think the Maryland win actually does help Michigan's resume some. But you look at Georgia, I'm still riled by that win against Oregon. I mean, I know Missouri, that was an ugly win. I know the Kent State game was an ugly win. You blew out Auburn. You blew out Vandy. I know it's Vandy, but you did beat them. But number 2, Georgia. That Georgia Tennessee game is going to be huge in a few weeks. And then number 1, Ohio State. Ohio State, I think, is the top team in the country. I kind of alluded to this last week. They still have Michigan. They get Penn State 2 weeks from now. Looking at how Penn State played against Michigan, though, I don't think that game's going to be that close. Even though I will say this, it is in Happy Valley, and Penn State usually tends to give Ohio State their best game. Even when some of those Penn State teams I don't think are really as good as Ohio State, Penn State always seems to at least at worst lose those games by like 2 possessions. So I will give Penn State that, but yeah, Ohio State, in my opinion, is just the best team in the country. The defense, I think, for the most part, is fixed. They have the wins. Well, they don't really have the wins, but they did go ahead. They did beat Notre Dame, which is looking like a win that doesn't really mean anything at this point. Michigan State, they beat. They blew out Wisconsin, so they do have the wins. There at Ohio State, and listen, you can only play what's on your schedule. So Ohio State, number 1, I do think they are. If I had to tell you who the top team in college football is, I do think I would say Ohio State. So that's the top 25 teams that I dropped out. Number 12, Baylor. I do think Baylor is the best 3-loss team in the country. I do. But at this point in the season, if you have 3 losses in mid-October and there's teams that only have 1 loss, I got to pick those teams over a 3-loss team. I do think Baylor at worst is a top 30-ish team. I'll probably pit Baylor still in my top 30. But that's where it comes down to more than anything. That was a kind of an ugly loss against West Virginia because I don't think West Virginia is that good of a team. I definitely think West Virginia is in the bottom half of the Big 12. But Baylor, dropped them out. We'll see how they do down the stretch. Number 19, Minnesota. I dropped them out. Minnesota, Tanner Morgan's out, and I'll just say this about Tanner Morgan: he's a good quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. He has these games sometimes that's just like what the. I mean, and he was having one of those games against Illinois. He got injured, carted off the field. Minnesota at this point. I mean, I still think they'll go to a bowl game, but I mean, this season, in my opinion, their aspirations I know was to make the Big Ten championship game. I think you got to get rid of those aspirations. You still have Wisconsin, you still have Northwestern, Iowa. You still have those three teams. I believe you get Penn State next week. That's gonna be, I think, to me, that's a 40-60 game. I still think Minnesota has a shot in that game, but I dropped Minnesota out. Just gotta look at them and be like, you just gotta look at them and feel bad for them because I think their goals of the Big Ten championship game is out the window at this point. Number 22, Kansas. I still think Kansas is a top 30 team. Um, and I said they will score against Oklahoma, and they did 42 points. It pisses me off that they didn't at least get a backdoor cover. I picked Kansas to beat Oklahoma, and that's a big win for Oklahoma to bounce back like that. And you might be like, well, it was against Kansas. Every college football poll had Kansas in the top 25. Don't tell me that it was just Kansas. That's a big win for Brent Venables. Hopefully they could get back on track, at least salvage part of the season there at Oklahoma. And the only thing I would say about Oklahoma is I don't get what those uniforms were. I think they were special uniforms, but I was not a fan of those uniforms. But um, yeah, I think Kansas will be alright. I know they're playing the backup quarterback, but they're going to score points. They'll probably at least go bowling still, I believe. They're at 5-2 at this point. They'll still go bowling. I think they'll still win at least another 2-3 games down the stretch here. And then number 23, James Madison. Listen, you're number 23 as a Group of 5 team, and you lost to 500 Group of 5 team. I gotta drop you. I will say this though about James Madison. I still think they could very well be back in the top 25. Same thing with Coastal Carolina. I mean, you look at the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt might be the deepest conference in college football. I mean, you had two teams beat James Madison and Coastal Carolina this week. Coastal Carolina got boat raced by Old Dominion, and Old Dominion they beat a Power Five school earlier this year. You could say Virginia Tech's having a bad season, but they did beat them. And then you have James Madison lose to Georgia Southern. I know, and Georgia Southern beat a Power Five school earlier this year in Nebraska. That game was more of a shootout back and forth. I think the final score was 45-38, Georgia Southern. And you can say, oh, they beat Nebraska. Nebraska's going to be competitive down the stretch here, I think, in Big Ten play. So we'll see what happens. They were competitive against Purdue, and I'll talk about Purdue here in a second. But the Sun Belt is a deep conference. It really is. So those are the four teams that dropped out. Teams I considered. If this was a top 26, Purdue would be the number 26 team. Purdue's probably kicking themselves that they did not beat Penn State because that's really the only thing holding them back, I think, really right now. And it was really close between Mississippi State and Purdue. I gave the nod to Mississippi State because I do think I just like their resume a little bit better. Mississippi State's resume a little bit better. But Purdue, listen, you beat Nebraska. It wasn't a convincing win, but you did beat them. You do have two impressive wins against Minnesota and Maryland. More Maryland in a second. Those are two top 30-ish, at the worst, top 35-ish wins right there. So those are impressive wins. We'll see what happens with Purdue. They still have Illinois on the schedule. They still have, I think, a few other Big Ten West teams on the schedule as well. So we'll see what happens. But Purdue, if this was the top 26, Purdue would be number 26. Cincinnati, UCF. I'm kind of going to pit these two together as one. I think Tulane. I'll go probably Tulane. Cincinnati and UCF as my top three in the American. Um, Cincinnati, I think I don't like the loss against Arkansas. So the problem with Cincinnati and UCF is that their Power Five losses aren't against impressive Power Five schools this year, in my opinion. I know Tulane's loss is against Southern Miss, but Tulane did beat their Power Five school. That's why I think Tulane is the best team out of all three of them. And if you look at Tulane, they're just beating up on teams. Cincinnati, kind of playing close against some bomb half teams in the American. UCF, they're blowing out the bomb half teams in the American. They hung 70 on Temple this. I think it was a Thursday night game. They hung 70 on Temple. UCF did. So I do think Cincinnati and UCF, you got to put them in your top 30. The one-loss teams. I'll probably go 26 Purdue, 27 Cincinnati, 28 UCF. I'll probably go 29 Baylor, 30 Kansas will be rounding out the top 30 there. So, um, but yeah, they're one-loss teams. Keep an eye on them. They are in the group of five. I know these teams are going to be in the Big 12 sooner or later, but definitely, definitely, I believe they're going to be in the Big 12 next year, along with Houston now, the American. But definitely, one loss teams in the Group of Five. Keep your eye on Liberty. The one loss is against number 15 Wake Forest by 1 point. I know it was ugly against Gardner and Red, but you did get the win. Think you got to consider them. Kentucky. Kentucky did beat Mississippi State. I know Mississippi State's still in the top 25. I can't get over Kentucky's loss to South Carolina. That's what it comes down to. The other loss is to Ole Miss. It is a good loss in my opinion. You go on the road, you lost a thriller against them. That South Carolina loss, I can't get over that. And you can sit there and be like, oh, but South Carolina's 4-2. They're probably one of the worst 4-2 teams in the Power Five. Probably, if not the worst team that's 4-2 in the Power Five. If you watch South Carolina play, you can tell they clearly have some issues with the offensive line and defensive line to a bit of a lesser extent. It's just, and you can sit there and be like, oh, they played the backup quarterback. Kentucky should have beat South Carolina, in my opinion. So but I did consider them, but I left them out. And then Maryland and Washington. I'll talk about Washington real quick because since I am a Maryland Terps fan, I'm going to probably prolong about them a little bit. But if you look at Washington's resume, you lost to UCLA. I know it was a one possession game. That game was 40-16 at one point. Okay, whatever. I think it was a Friday night game. You went on the road and lost undefeated UCLA team. That's a top 10 team. Okay. Your other losses to Arizona State. Arizona State's a bad team this year. They already fired their head coach. That's a bad loss. But they are 5-2. Washington. The Michigan State beating Wisconsin, I think, does help Washington's resume a little bit. So you got to at least give them a shout out, in my opinion. But I didn't really consider them. Maryland. I am a Maryland fan. We beat Indiana 38-33. Game reminded me a lot of last year's Maryland Indiana's game. Indiana's not a horrible team, but I mean, I think they're destined to go 5-7. If you want my honest opinion, um, if you look at Maryland's resume, they lost to two teams. A team that I said will be number 26 in the poll if this was a top 26 poll, and they lost by one score to the number 3 team in this poll. Maryland's two losses are pretty good losses. 2 points lost to Purdue at home. A game that I actually think Maryland got screwed over a little bit, and I think Maryland should at least had the opportunity to play in overtime in that game. Um, so the outcome could have very well been different. And then the Michigan game, he didn't spot them a free touchdown the first 15 seconds by muffing an open kick. You very well could be playing in overtime, at least in that game as well. So keep an eye on Maryland. They get Northwestern next week. They should win that game. They'll be 6-2. And then they go into Madison in the Jump House. We'll see what happens there. I think that's a 50-50 game if I had to say right now. But Maryland, gotta consider them. I think at worst they're a top 35 team. So want to give a shout out to my Terps. But that's the top 25. Comment down below. Tell me what you think. I always like hearing from you all. Thanks for watching the video. Hit the thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel. Very appreciate if you do that. This is McD the Beast signing off.